Hello, I'm Ben. Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to discuss what's the state of your business and where you should be looking at putting the maximum effort. Sometimes when you're in business as an entrepreneur or in small business ownership, you'll get to the point where you have to decide what's going on in the business, and you have a gut that is not going well. You have a very short period of time at that point to figure out what's happening and what you need to do next. So to start out, let's say this. We've talked about in previous videos, and you've read plenty of books probably around positive attitude and the power of positive attitude. That is an extremely strong suggestions to have a positive attitude. There's tons of metrics around it, and how businesses where that's normalized is how they perform versus businesses where it's not. But sometimes you run up against the walls that the positive attitude is not going to change. So we talked about business demand in previous videos, costs, waste control, those type things. So we're going to look at that a little bit here. In big business, when you're assessing large organizations, multi-unit organizations, places where you go and you have different locations, and you'll have a director or vice presidents or regional managers, etc. Those folks look at locations when they take them over and basically use a triage mindset. Okay, so businesses, they come across, and locations specifically come across in different categories. For me, it's 5 different categories. For me, I look at the worst case being survival, where business is in a mode where they have a hard time keeping their people, turnover is rampant, cost controls are rampant, supervision at sites is limited. It's kind of a worst case scenario where you have a lot of risk because it's not being run like it should be. Things aren't getting paid on time. Things aren't being appropriated as necessary. Customer service issues come up, and complaints are common. So that's the worst case scenario. That's the survival mode. That's a business that may be on its way out if things aren't corrected very quickly. The next would be sustaining business, right? That's level 2. A sustaining business, it's doing well. The team is surviving. The place is paying its bills. It's doing enough to keep the doors open, but from a profit standpoint, a cost control standpoint, it's not specifically profitable above a nominal rate, and it's not specifically appropriate in how cost controls are handled, and you're not seeing that waste are being managed out appropriately. Training sometimes is an issue. Quality of service sometimes is an issue, and the quality of product can become an issue. And if you're in manufacturing, I would not put any location that has a safety issue that can't go at least 90 days without an injury, etc. Especially in a situation where you're in a high injury rated industrial environment, like the pallet yards and wood lumber companies are in some of those ratings are a little bit worse because of what you're handling, metal materials, welding shops, etc. If those locations aren't doing well when it comes to safety, then I would not move them above that number 2 category, which is sustaining. And we'll get more to that here in a bit. Next is living. That's your 3rd category. Those businesses have strong safety protocols, strong quality procedures, great responsiveness to customers, very few customer complaints. They seem to be doing what's right. Costs are under thumb and then controlled. There is a linear expenditure amount annually, which means it's kind of like rent. Your rent's fixed. You pay the same amount every month. So if you look at P&L for 12 months, you see that rent is the same all across there, except for the month where taxes hit, etc. if you don't roll that out for the entire year. So that's the thought process around living. Is it's profitable? Maybe profitability has some more opportunity. Turnover is well underhand. Teammates are tenured, so tenured teammates suggest better quality of product, better quality of customer service as well. So living is a good spot to be, and that's average. That's where businesses should be, and it's a healthy business at that point. Number 4 would be leading. This is an industry. This is a site that not only are all those things put together, but this site cultivates several best practices every year. This site cultivates leaders and new leadership. Basically, if a teammate goes to that site, they're going to get trained. They're going to have to prove sustainability in process. They're going to be able to show best practices, and that's how they do business. And basically, this site produces folks that can then go run other sites or other businesses to the same expectation. That's a pretty good spot to be. And then the final 5th category is bounding. So bounding is when you have an organization. I mentioned in another video a certain gas station chain that I think is one of these bounding businesses. For a while, Chick-fil-A was, and I think Chick-fil-A is still doing that. I mentioned these same businesses because they are outperforming other businesses in their line. But bounding means you can open multiple locations a year. You can staff and sustain staff for that. You're promoting up within, so you're able to expand because people are staying. They're not leaving, which means typically you have good pay rates. Pay is something that I don't discuss much in these things, but companies that are slow to increase pay to competitive pay wages and pay a fair rate for a day's worth of work, those companies deserve exactly what they get. And unfortunately, folks that work for those companies, especially at some of the larger firms, it's slower to change. You're slower to change your pay rates because it's a massive expenditure. If you think you have 3,000 employees or 10,000 employees or greater, a slight change per hour per teammate, when you multiply that times that teammate's 40 to 50 hours and times those 52 weeks a year, and then you'll multiply that times however many thousands of teammates there are, that can be tens of millions of dollars. So when we're talking about bounding, these are locations that already do that, and within the performance, within the profitability of the organization, you have the money there to support other locations and support that growth. So that fifth mark, that's not necessarily a possibility for all businesses. Small businesses and entrepreneurial endeavors, they may not get to the point where you want that, right? Because at a certain point, replication and expansion, it does impact profitability, and it does limit whether the business is profitable or not. So that's kind of the triage of business and how it looks. And so here's the point. If you work for an organization where you are being held to a standard that is living, right, where it's good, things are processed, put in point, your leadership is tenured and they're staying, you can improve those things and have a deep impact at that level. When you're in a situation where you're in survival mode, it's a different situation. At that point, you're just trying to sustain your tenured teammates, let them become more tenured, control costs at those times, and ultimately what you see over time is they will get more normalized and things will become more normal. They'll move through that sustaining situation because that's what that is. It's basically making the business healthy and get to the point that they are living. But you can't skip those steps. Ultimately, you have to look at a business for where it is and have to improve it from that point forward. So the reason I wanted to put this video out is I've been talking about stay your business. So once you look at that and you assess the business, some of the key components that people run into in entrepreneurial endeavors are warning signs that the business is in trouble. So once you get past the first 90 days to 120 days, there's a whammy. Because in your town where you're at, especially if you're a small business, you'll have a lot of people that come in the first 90 days. You'll have numbers for the first month, and then 60 days, and then 90 days. Sometimes it'll fall after the first month because the curiosity at that point has been answered, right? So now you're going to start to learn your normal traffic and your normal cash flow. And the cash flow period, that's how much cash will come into a business in a certain period of time. So I always use a weekly cash flow. I think most businesses are small, especially, should use what a weekly sales number is, because then you kind of know what's coming in every day. And as you have years under your belt, you can go back and look at those metrics, look at those yearly averages, and it should show seasonality. So, for instance, I'll use a business I'm a partner in currently. When we looked at it last month, the cash flow was very low, and we're like, oh, what's happening here? But then when you look at the previous 2 years, well, it's 104 degrees outside. So people aren't coming out as they would in other months because it's too blinking hot. So that's kind of some of the things you'll come up with once you get the seasonality established and you have that to use as a performance rating for your business. So that's the other piece, is as the business substantiates and stays, if it's a healthy business, you'll have those numbers and you should be able to contend it. But some of the warning signs that you should see are cash flow issues. So cash flow. If you don't have the business and the sales receipts coming in as normal, like you can see if you have the seasonality available to you, that's number one. A bank account balance, if you see that they're historically low or they're not getting where they are or not sustaining, that's number two. If your sales outlook is challenged, where you don't have new customers, if you require new customers, or your current customers are shortening their orders because of inflation or because of limitations. A lot of businesses that go just in time too, if you're a provider to a business that's gone just in time, they're going to hold very little inventory on their site. It may suggest that you have to hold more inventory for them, which can impact you negatively because you're going to have storage area. But the flip side of that, as long as you're staying in the business, you should still see the opportunity to do the volume. They've just moved to a just-in-time system. If they've taken away some of the volume necessary, then you have to look at that and determine, is your inventory going stale? So as inventory sits, its value decreases. Whether it's made of, it doesn't really matter if it's a replenishable item like a food item or something like that, or if it's a storage warehouse item. If a storage warehouse item stays in a warehouse for months at a time, it gets covered in dust and spider webs and filth. And so after a while, it's going to be hard to sell that product as new because it's gotten stale there in your warehouse. That's how it works. It's just how things go. So you have to turn inventory. We always say first in, first out, because if you turn inventory first in, first out, then you should have nothing aging or growing stale on the vine. But inventory aging is a warning sign for businesses, so it's something to pay attention to. I always say inspect what you expect. So if you have a warehouse setting and you can go through and look at all these items and inspect these items daily, it's what you should be doing at least once or twice a week, so you can notice, hey, that's been there for a month, we need to get it gone, or what's the issue, who would buy this, and why are they not buying? And then you can look at your receipts and your trends and see if they're purchasing, have you lost the customer, or have they downsized or gone to just in time. But these warning signs are things that you have to pay attention to, because if production is the same and you're putting out the same number of items and you see that they're backstacking, if these people are not going to take what they used to take, then you have to put on your sales team to get out and find new customers. So that's something you have to think about. And before you get to that point, you just want to keep that inventory. I think all of our inventory should be counted every day if it's possible, and that way you can see what the trend's like, and it also helps prevent theft. So after we go through that, the late or shut off notices on bills. So if you go to your locations and you find out, or if you're a small business, if you know that you can't pay something on time, etc., and you see that that is happening, unless you have a vendor services management group within your company, very large companies have that, where they have a purchasing procedure, and sometimes those folks will make things wait to 90 days. They'll drag stuff out and pay it. In the end, this is a savings from a interest standpoint. I don't advise that. I say when it gets there, pay it to be free of it and move through. Document that you paid it so you don't forget it, you don't miss a vendor. But those lates and shut-off notices, those can be warning signs. And then that the last piece around the purchase or the sales slow, that's something that should be noticed right away. So if you're reviewing those things weekly, I would say weekly is the longest gap you want to give it. If you go to the point where you review that monthly, you're missing too much opportunity to make a correction and get ahead of it. So let's talk about improving cash flow. There's multiple ways to do that. I'm ultimately going to do a video on waste and what that is. It's a lean process, a lean thought process rather. But the number one way to improve cash flow is, one, take on a partner and increase reserves, right? So in most businesses that I buy into, they're in that sustaining or survival rating. When I look at them and I buy into them, that's what I am. I'm a venture capitalist. I'm bringing in more cash reserves to take on the business, take on those challenges, and determine, if it's going to be profitable. I typically will not touch a business that cannot show me a track record of a strong cash flow and cash handling procedure, also with training and waste reduction. So I think that's something that's worth calling out. So you increase the reserves that you have on hand. The next, obviously, is increase sales and be strategic around sales, around specific inventories. So pricing sometimes comes into that. Some prices you should probably go up on stuff that's flying out, but the other stuff that's not moving, you move that down strategically. There is a car dealership that buys cars and sells them that way, and it's a fantastic business model. They buy things at auction. They mark it up like $1,700. 30 days they drop it, 60 days they drop it, 90 days they drop it down to what they paid for it. And then after 90 days, they basically are cutting the vehicle to get it gone because they want it sold, because it's a numerical value for them. The more they sell, the better they do. So increase sales, raise in prices, improve collections. If you have collections out, or if you have accounts that you let people put credit against, you improve those collections. You make sure that they're paid in a timely manner. Have a payment due every 15th of the month, so you don't go 60 days without getting payment on your inventory that's not there, if you do that. Layaway options sometimes make sense because you can do a layaway and get a piece of the profit, but sometimes that drives more issues than it does results. Tighten customer credit is what you're doing there. You're not going to let 90 days or 120 days be the rule. They offer credit for 30 days, as opposed to 60 or 90 or 120. Cut cost is honestly the best way to trim a business. Most businesses get so caught up in how they do things. They say this is how we do it. So in most businesses, you have an opportunity to cut costs. You just have to identify what those costs are. Sometimes it's headcount reduction, but a lot of times it can be other things like any process improvements, fuel consumption, mileage consumption, those type things that businesses are doing. You sometimes can find great opportunities within that. Having people, office from home versus coming in 5 days a week, have them come in 3 days a week. If you have a sustained, professional workforce, you have those opportunities to cut some cost. So you're not paying for mileage, you're not paying for travel, and you can limit those things as much as possible. Company cell phones versus personal usage of the cell phones. That's something to look at. Phones are expensive. Something you may look at there. The next thing that a lot of small businesses don't think about, but they should, especially in the state of Texas or in southern states, because there's a lot of grant money in those states to sustain and keep businesses there. Grant money can be from the state. All states have grants. Within your state, there's several economic commissions. So in your town, they most likely have an economic development corporation or a commission that is a corporation where you can get money for sustaining jobs and creating jobs there. That picture up there on that top shelf is me getting a check from a mayor for creating a certain number of jobs in their town. Those things are very viable, and they typically pay for the first 3 years. So if you sustain the jobs and you increase the job headcount, that can be a significant amount of money paid back to you in tax benefits, but a straight check for sustaining that business within the city. It may be good to cover the rent for the year if you do it right, or cover the rent for half the year. If that's the case, you're still increasing that cash flow, and you're limiting what you have going out by cutting those costs. The last two things are trim inventory, which we talked about, and then barter where possible. Barter is something that used to be highly usable. It's not used as much anymore. I think that's unfortunate, but that's what I guess businesses in back thrived on back in the day, decades ago. It's not that long ago, actually, about a century ago in the 30s and 40s. That's what actually helped us get out of the recession and the Great Depression. So that's something to think about, barter where possible. That trim inventory is what I talked about a little bit earlier. I alluded to on inventory getting stale and staying there. And we're not talking about restaurants. We're talking about, manufacturing or anything else where you sustain a certain amount of inventory. If it's stale, reduce your number. Cut it by half. If you have inventory that is stale again, cut it by half again. Maintain as much as necessary to support your customers, but not any more than that would be my suggestion around trimming inventory. So that's just a brief video on what's the state of your business. Sometimes you have to do that. You should be assessing your business monthly. You should be assessing these other things weekly that we talked about. At the end of the year, when you're looking at your business and you're looking at quarterly performance, if you assess these things often and you catch it within a month, you can typically fix it and you can impact a trend, and you can see that turns around. If you reduce that waste, reduce that amount of inventory you're holding, and pay attention regularly, you can triage your business appropriately and have it go to the proper situation and create the right lifestyle for you and your teammates. So that's just a brief video on some of these things. I know I'm talking about a lot of business items on this channel. That's what it's going to be dedicated to. Business owners' entrepreneurial thought process, but these are the same processes that huge corporations use to manage their bottom line and direct their P&Ls. So I hope this is helpful. If it is, please subscribe to the channel. Please send anybody else that you think this would be useful to the channel, and let me know what you think in the comments. I appreciate the attention here. Be good.